Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Charlie Hunnam travels into the Amazon jungle to search for the lost city of Zed in the new film from James Gray. Set in the early 20th century, Percy Fawcett, played by Charlie Hunnam, a major without decoration, is hired by the Royal Geographic Society to journey into the Amazon jungle to map and survey the land between Brazil and Bolivia and avert a war over rubber. As he travels upriver along with Robert Pattinson's Henry Costin, Percy learns of a mysterious ancient city that would prove an early civilization lived in the Amazon that he nicknamed Zed. Despite taking him away from his wife Nina, played by Sienna Miller, and son Jack, plays an adult by Tom Holland, Percy makes several expeditions to try and find his fabled lost city, an obsession that would span 20 years. The Lost City of Zed is based off David Grann's 2009 non-fiction book of the same name, although it's only really an adaptation of half that book. Much of it is journalist Grann going on his own Amazon expedition, retracing Fawcett's footsteps and going on his own adventures. And instead of opting for a Julie and Julia style approach to the adaptation, the filmmakers have decided to concentrate on the parts related to Fawcett himself, who was quite a popular but also mysterious figure that shaped many pulp adventure heroes, including the likes of Indiana Jones. Although if you go into this movie expecting those kind of antics, you'll be severely disappointed, because The Lost City of Zed is not about action or adventure, it's much more thoughtful and meditative, and that makes a lot of sense when you realise that it's directed by James Gray, who helmed The Yards and We Own the Night, and he makes movies that are very, very old-fashioned, or classical really. He makes the kind of films that you don't often see these days. And The Lost City of Zed is definitely what I would describe as an old-school epic. It's a big, huge narrative that spans 2 decades across its 140-minute running time, and they actually went and shot on location in the Amazon, and it's definitely the kind of movie that would be very much at home in the 70s or the very early 80s. When we first meet Percy Fawcett in the early parts of the 20th century, he's a major without decoration. He's got the skills as shown in an early hunting scene, but he's very much overlooked and wants to prove himself. He's not yet rode into battle, and he finds himself being ignored by many people on account of his family's reputation, because at this point it's very much a classist, reputation-led society. So when the Royal Geographic Society offers him the chance to map and survey Brazil and Bolivia, although he initially has reservations, he does jump at the chance because it offers him the opportunity to forge his own legacy away from his family's shadow. But this idea of him needing to prove himself, that sense of validation, I think that's a core tenet of Fawcett's character. When Fawcett returns from his first expedition having learnt of Zed, I think that desire for validation has mutated somewhat. It's not simply about himself, but also this lost city, because in there lies the proof to the ideas that he's developed while on his travels in the Amazon. It's worth noting that Fawcett, as depicted in this film, is seen as very much an early progressive, at least to a certain extent, especially in his ideas towards the indigenous people, who he very much sees firsthand being abused and subjugated. He's seen them used as slaves by the rubber barons, one in particular characterised by Franco Nero in a one-scene appearance. He very much comes to the opinion that these people, they're not inferior. Unfortunately, many of his peers held the views of the time which were very racist, very white superior, and admittedly this is a little bit of historical airbrushing in that even Gray himself has admitted that Fawcett himself wasn't quite as progressive as depicted in the film, but it makes for good drama, and it certainly makes him an interesting character in the movie, because he's definitely one that tries to relate to the native tribes and tries to make himself knowledgeable about their culture and very much being open-minded. But it's that desire to prove that these people have worth and not simply savages, as many of the other people in his circle like to refer to them. They are able to have civilizations, of which his idea for Zed would most definitely prove, but also it would cast aside those very, very draconian ideas of these people, of which not much is really known at that point in time. And I think there is definitely a sense of my colonialism is better than your colonialism going on in the movie, in that it is a celebration of old-fashioned exploring, but it's very much seen through this quite positive figure that tries to adapt himself to the cultures he finds rather than try to destroy them. And towards the end of the film, Fawcett is convinced to take on one more expedition on account of the fact that Americans are now starting to explore the same area, and they might not be as hospitable to the native indigenous people as he is. But it's obsession that drives Fawcett, and by extension the film itself. But that's very difficult to convey on screen, and presents a major challenge for Charlie Hunnam, of which I'm not sure he's up for the task. Don't get me wrong, I think that Hunnam's a good actor, and in many ways he often looks very much the part in the central role, but I found myself not being wholly engaged with the movie, and I think a lot of that comes down to his central performance. It's just missing that certain something. I think it is worth noting that originally this was going to star Brad Pitt as Fawcett, and I think that he would have been a great choice for the role, especially because he has the right kind of presence and charisma that would have carried the movie, because so much of it is internalised within this character. You know, that it's very hard to convey determination in a very direct kind of way, and as much as Hunnam tries very, very hard in this movie, and there are definitely scenes where he's quite good, I didn't find him really a wholly engaging presence. There's definitely scenes in which Hunnam very much rises to the challenge. He has a standout scene in the middle of the movie where he's offering up his theory of Zed at a lecture, and it's this very loud, gregarious audience that's jeering against him, and he's shouting over them and firing jokes back in their direction. And there's a real confidence and poise in that particular scene that I felt was missing from the rest of the movie. That scene stands out, and yet for a lot of the movie I don't think that Hunnam conveyed a loss of Fawcett's personality on screen. I know that I kind of stand out a little bit on this because there are certain people that feel that Hunnam's performance was great and the film in general is a masterpiece, but I found him actually to be somewhat of a barrier to the film. And it's a shame because there are long stretches of this movie that he does have to carry, especially on the expeditions into the Amazon. I mentioned before how they shot on location, and the results are gorgeous. The cinematography is amazing in this movie, seeing all these visuals as they travel upriver. It really makes you feel like you're travelling alongside Fawcett in the searing humidity and all the dangers and perils of the jungle. It really feels like an exciting whole other world away from the scenes in England, which by comparison seem quite staid and very, very grey in some respects. Ironically, those scenes were shot in Ireland. But these scenes in the Amazon, they are truly tremendous. You almost feel like you're breaking out into a flop sweat watching them, much like the actors whose costumes are absolutely drenched in what I would very much assume is very authentic sweat. But on a story level, in the way that the film conveys the jungle, especially on Fawcett's first trip, I wasn't quite so enamoured as Fawcett with the Amazon. It's an arduous expedition, I'll give you, but the first expedition in particular seems like it's all them constantly fighting against the fact that they haven't got enough rations, that they're constantly starving, they are getting shot at and attacked by native tribes as they sail upriver. People are dying or getting attacked by piranhas. It's so full of danger that although when they reach their ultimate destination at the top of the river there is that genuine sense of wonder and awe, it doesn't truly convey why Fawcett wants to keep returning back there. That's a little bit of a problem again for me getting involved with the narrative, but for all the splendour on screen, the scenes that I actually gravitated towards the most were the ones with Percy at home with his family, because I think those are where the true drama of the film really lies. Whenever Percy goes out on his expeditions, he of course goes for years at a time, and that has a major personal cost, especially with his growing family. When he first sets out, Jack is but a toddler learning how to walk. And then, many years later, he's grown up and he's almost a man, now played by Tom Holland. And all these years with this expanding family of which he hardly knows because he spent so long in the jungle. That first major scene with Holland where he challenges his father about the fact that he spent so much time away, and all that anger and resentfulness that has just been building up for years. That's a really powerful, emotionally played scene. And Holland, although he comes into the film well over an hour in, he really makes the most of his relatively limited screen time in roughly the last 40 or so minutes of this movie. He is really great, especially because the character himself changes a lot as the years go by, and as he spends more time with his father and tries to come to understand him a lot more, and eventually accompanies him on his expedition. And it's this richness in the supporting cast that really makes this feel like an epic, and you can very much see this with Sienna Miller as Fawcett's wife, who is very devoted to her husband and helps him out in researching on Zed, but is also seen as a progressive, perhaps even more so than he is. And in many ways feels like she's quite constricted by the ideas of women that were held in England at this particular period in time. She mentioned in an earlier scene how she'd rather be in something much more comfortable than wearing a dress, for example. And there's a great scene halfway through the movie where she tries to convince Percy to take her on an expedition, and this is why I say that he's a progressive to an extent, because while he has positive ideas of the indigenous people, there's still very much conservative ideas of women in his mind, which is to say very reductive and restrictive ideas, in that while he respects her mind and her ability, he fears that she's not up to the physical rigour of going through the jungle. An argument which she immediately destroys and very much starts an argument over, and very much tears up those very chauvinistic ideas of women. And that's a great scene. It really offers Miller something that in another movie could have felt like a very underwritten part. She has played a lot of roles recently where she's played the supportive wife, most notably in American Sniper, but it feels like there's something definitely substantial about this character. There is the sense that she's quite an ambitious figure, that she's desperate to do many of the same things that Percy is doing, but finds herself being very restricted by the society that she lives in. She's unfortunately a woman maybe perhaps born in the wrong time. Elsewhere in the supporting cast, you've got Ian McDiarmid, Emperor Palpatine himself as the head of the Royal Geographic Society, a portly Angus McFadden as a member of the elite that accompanies Percy on his second expedition and proves to be especially ill-suited to trekking through the jungle, and that's a role that's very much a scene stealer. He's a very much larger-than-life character that not only appears to be going through their rations, but also seems to be taking great chunks out of the jungle as well, and actually made that portion of the film quite memorable for me. Although I do have to say that I was a little bit disappointed by Robert Pattinson's performance in this movie. He's very much tried to cast aside Twilight in his most recent years, and he very much gets into his character. It's just that he doesn't seem to have a lot to do in this movie. He has a good introduction where he first stumbles on Percy when he's drunk, but afterwards, although that character is displayed as being quite loyal to Percy, he doesn't really stand out. He always seems to blend into the background, which is unfortunate because I think what that character is meant to serve as being the more rational-minded among the group. He's very much second in command to Percy and is the one that essentially has to draw him back. He is his conscience on this trip, essentially. And although he follows through the movie, he never really made too much of an impression on me, unfortunately. If you're familiar with Fawcett, you know how this story ends, and suffice to say, the ending to the movie is ambiguous and inconclusive, but in many ways that's exactly the point, and not simply because it's a tale where the journey is more important than the destination, given this is about exploration, but also because in Percy's mind, what he's built up Zed to be is so all-encompassing that it could never match up even if he does find it. He's ultimately searching for something that's intangible, and thus the ending is intentionally underwhelming, although I will say the final shot of the movie is breathtaking. Although my reservations with the movie are not simply because it ends on a relatively low note, but more because as much as I admire the film for what it is and what's on screen, I found it very difficult to love. The Lost City of Zed is an ambitious and richly textured film, but it's also one that left me cold overall. Both a celebration of exploration and a look at the nature and perils of obsession, James Gray's thoughtful movie is itself a throwback to expansive old-school epics, less about adventure and more spiritual. But Hunnam's lead performance doesn't truly convey the internal desire for the jungle that drives Fawcett. For all of its gorgeous Amazon cinematography, I wasn't quite as transported as the explorers were, and ironically the scenes I connected with were the ones with Fawcett's family back home. Miller as Fawcett's wife, constricted by Edwardian ideas of women, and later Holland as his resentful son give fantastic performances, but Pattinson makes little impression as Percy's fellow explorer. It's a film that is worth the 2-hour-plus trek for its virtues if you're in the right mindset, but I found it hard to truly enjoy whilst watching so much as think over and admire in hindsight. If you like this review, please support my work over at my Patreon. I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.